Peace be with you. My name is Alan Kiesler. Welcome to the Institute of All Intelligent Life. Today is Tuesday, the 8th of November, 2016, and we're going to begin today our discussion of the human species, the different, not ourselves, but the various human species on other planets and other star systems, because we are just one species of many human species spread throughout our part of our galaxy. And so we are going to review the history of the different human species first. And as I mentioned yesterday, there are many other types of intelligent life also, besides human type. Reptilians are perhaps the most famous. And I started with description of some reptilians yesterday. And we will come back to them later. But for today and tomorrow, maybe the next, I don't know how many days, we will discuss the human-like species, since they are the ones that are most familiar to us. And specifically, we will start with the human-like species that have had the most interaction with us, which are the Pleiadeans and Sirians also. These two groups from the Pleiades star cluster and from the multiple star system of Sirius are the human-like groups who've had the most interaction with Earth humans, and for many, many, many thousands of years they have been coming here, seeing how we're doing, helping us, and so we will talk about them. But first I'll give a little bit of background about the history of human-like, I will call them humans. They're not Earth humans, although of course we're related, but they are the humans of our part of the galaxy. And I'm indebted to Sheldon Neidl, who is a wonderful person who now lives not far from here in Northern California, not far from Esparto on the other side of Sacramento. And he, since childhood, he's a little older than I am, about my age, and since childhood he also was contacted by humans, that is from other planets, mostly from Sirius, and they instructed him from an early age, and he has vast knowledge about the other forms of intelligent life in our part of the galaxy. And the information that I'm going to be describing today is largely coming from his book called Our Galactic Neighbors. And that book is available online. You have to purchase it. But I strongly recommend, if you want to go into details, a lot of details about the different species of life in our galactic neighborhood, you can get that book. Again, it's Sheldon, S-H-E-L-D-A-N, Neidl, N-I-D-L-E. Your Galactic Neighbors is the name of his book. So Sheldon and his sister Susan, from the time they were, very small children, even like 5 years old, they were contacted by visitors who came to them and spoke to them telepathically and in dreams and also physically, and taught them the information that they would need to know. And Sheldon has a very important role to play in introducing us to our galactic neighbors and sharing with us information from the Galactic Federation, as he calls it, the Galactic Federation of Light, which is a federation of many, many star systems, in fact many other galactic federations also, several other galactic federations, which are all combined together in this huge organization, which we are now joining. We are in the process of coming into that community, and we are being introduced to them, and this is something that's very, very important for us all to understand at this point in our history. So as I've said before, in the next few years, all this information is going to become common knowledge. And the only reason why it has not yet is because of the cabal, the so-called Illuminati, who control our media and our educational systems, and they have prevented us from learning these things. But now their grip on human society of our earth is weakening, and so, thanks to the internet largely, many more people are learning about this and getting ready for this wonderful day where we will come into open contact with our galactic neighbors, and we will join them in this galactic federation. So, I think I'll just begin by a few comments on how Sheldon explains how the human races, the various human species from different planetary systems in our section of the galaxy originated. And I've been asked this question many times, so just let me say again that evolution, Darwinian evolution, is basically incorrect in its idea that intelligence happens by random chance. It's not intelligently guided. However, the guidance by intelligence leads to a sort of evolution, and that means that different intelligent species of life, that is, third density forms of life, which are self-reflective, humanoid, third density life, it evolves from second density life, usually, from animals. So, as I mentioned yesterday, many different species of intelligent life look like different animals that we're familiar with. So we will go into some of those other non-human type societies later, but for now I want to talk about the history and give one example specifically of a human society. So the human societies in our neighborhood, our galactic neighborhood, began from the star Vega. Now Vega is a very important star. It's in the constellation Lyra, which is in the northern skies, so in the northern hemisphere we can see it. And you can look it up if you're interested in seeing. Vega is quite a bright star. And on the third planet around that star, there was a species of aquatic apes who were the physical basis of the evolvement of the third density human species that have now spread throughout our part of the galaxy. So this is about, according to Sheldon Neidl, this information is coming, about 8 million years ago. The beings that we know of as human beings began on the star Vega, which is about 26 light years from here. Star Vega is not that far away from us, and I have a particular affection for the star Vega because my good wife and mentor, Carol Peterson Kiesler, she has had a special connection with Vega. This is a little, I wasn't actually planning, but now I'm feeling the urge to talk about that because she is a wonderful, highly spiritual person, and in 2011 she visited Norway, and there is an island on the coast of Norway called Vega, and she was called there to perform a ceremony. She has done many ceremonies in sacred spots, especially in Mexico and South America, a ritual or a ceremony to open a star gate or portal between our planet and the Vega star system. And she did that, so the communication between those beings from Vega and the Earth has been facilitated by the opening of that rainbow bridge, as they call it in Scandinavia. And so Vega is also special for us because, as Nassim Harriman has revealed and pointed out, not revealed, that's where I learned it from. He's a very great scientist. If you're not familiar with him, you should find out about his work too. So Nassim Harriman has told us, that's where I learned it from, that our star, our system, our star system and solar system is heading towards Vega. That is, the different stars are of course moving in different directions, and we are heading towards Vega. So that's a very interesting thing. So Vega is a special star, and it's from there that the human species that we're familiar with originated, according to this history from extraterrestrial sources relayed to us from Sheldon Neidl. And it gradually spread to different star systems. In the beginning, the Lyrans, that is the Vegans, they moved to Sirius and Andromeda. So Sirius is the brightest star in our sky. It's also nearby us, not that far from us. So Sirius was one of the first areas that was colonized by those humans from Vega. And the other was Andromeda. Andromeda is a huge, huge collection of stars. Actually, there are, I don't know how many, many. And there is a huge galactic federation centered in Andromeda also, which became part of the galactic federation that we're talking about, the Galactic Federation of Light. So I just will, I have my notes here, I'm going to just talk a little bit about some of the different human civilizations that are part of this Galactic Federation, and then I will focus on talking especially about the Pleiadeans, which have been very active in the recent past also, at the present time also, on our planet. So, Andromeda is a very, very huge federation of many, many star systems, and they are very famous because they are expert scientists and technologists. And much of the problems that we're facing on our Earth, the ecosystem problems, are being worked on by Andromedans. And another important group is the Altarians from Altair. Altair is a very interesting human society because they, unlike most of the human societies in our part of the galaxy, they have not been constant members of the Galactic Federation. They have sort of joined it and then left it, and joined it and left it as it seemed to them was beneficial. Beneficial for what? Not really just for themselves, but for their work. And the people of Altair are especially famous because they are expert mediators. And they have been the main human group, practically the only human group, who had dealings with the reptilians. That is, the vast majority of the reptilians in our part of the galaxy have, for the past long time, been hostile and been warring and been fighting, and they have that reputation because that is sort of the reptilian nature, I guess you could even say. But as I've mentioned about specific reptilians, and as Sheldon Neidl has informed us, that the majority of the reptilians in our part of the galaxy have recently changed their position. And instead of fighting as they've been doing for a long time and conquering, often successfully conquering many other star systems, they just in the very recent past, means the last 20 years or so, they've joined the Galactic Federation, and they've decided to give up their long warring activities and try to develop peacefully with their neighbors. And the main exception that's important for us is the reptilians who are on our planet and who are working with the Cabal, the Illuminati, so-called Illuminati leaders of our planet. They are still trying to hold out, although almost all the other reptilians around in the other star systems in our part of the galaxy have given up that mood, that attitude of fighting. And so it's not going to be very much longer that the reptilians and the Cabal associated with them on our planet will lose their position of control, which they've had for many thousands of years here. So the Altarians are the group of humans who have been mediators, who have been working together to try to bridge the differences between the reptilians and most of the other groups. As I mentioned yesterday, often insectoid-type groups have been allied with the reptilians, but most of the other human and humanoid groups have been more peace-loving. And so the Altarians were largely responsible for that. another interesting thing about the Altarians is they have a different governmental system than most of the human groups. That is, most human groups don't have like a king and nobles, royalty, etc. But that's what we're familiar with from the last hundreds of years, last numbers of centuries or millennia on our planet. We usually had that system of royalty with a king or queen as the leader. That has been the system that the Altarians have had also. But now that's changing. They're also changing, developing a more, well, the system that most of the human groups use in our part of the galaxy is a clan group system. That is where different groups of people who have different abilities or different tendencies, they are grouped together and they have a governing body, which they select as their leaders. And then those governing bodies have representatives that go to a governing council, and they don't have one king. So that's the more usual system, but in this the Altarians have been somewhat unique among the human groups. It's more like the reptilian system of having a one ruler. Let me just see, a couple of the other interesting human groups are those from the constellation of Eridani, which is quite near us also. Epsilon Eridani, which is the main star that has a human population on its planets, is only about 10.5 light years from here. And they are actually one of the first solar systems that the Earth astronomers learned about as having planets. So we have only in the last 20 years or so, 20 some years ago, was the first time that Earth astronomers were actually able to detect planets circling stars. We didn't know before then that there were any stars that had planets like the Earth circling them. So that was only discovered in the 1990s, I believe, and that this Eridani constellation, and specifically the Epsilon Eridani star, or the star is called Cursa, was one of the first ones that we learned about that has planets. And since then we've learned there are hundreds and thousands, and actually the conclusion now that astronomers have come to is that probably most, if not all, stars do have planets circling them. And many of them have planets similar to the Earth. That is, in terms of distance from the star, the temperature of the star, they would be like our Earth. And in fact, most star systems have planets in the same sort of area as ours, and many of them have water, and they have a very similar climate to Earth. Most of the planets don't. Most of them are drier, desert-like, or they are gas giants like Jupiter and Saturn, and so they're quite different than the Earth. But there are many planets that are very similar to Earth, and one of the first planetary systems that was discovered was Eridani, Epsilon Eridani. And well, let me just mention that the specific characteristic of the humans that they're famous for, from Epsilon Eridani, is that they employ what is called heart logic, which we might call intuition. That is, knowing, the process of knowing through the heart rather than through the mind, by spiritual or intuitive perception. And they're very advanced in that, and they share that knowledge, and they help train other people in that knowledge also. The next group of humans that, well, I don't know how much detail. I'll just mention one more, perhaps. That is from Alpha Aries, the Aries constellation. If you're familiar with it, it's one of the constellations in the zodiac. The star is called Hamal, and it is about 65 light years from Earth. And it's a very interesting system because it is mainly human beings, but it also has a hybrid species, which is a human species. It was a result of hybridization with a dinosaurian or reptilian type of being many, many years ago, many millions, I think, of years ago. As the reptilians were spreading because I'll talk about that more a little later when we go into the reptilians. But they were very warlike and conquering, and they conquered a number of systems. And so they did come to the Aries constellation area, and they captured a number of the human groups there, and they were these human groups were under their control for quite a long period, and the reptilians or the dinosaurians did genetic experiments and created a hybrid race, and after some time they were released, and so this group returned to their star brothers and sisters in the Aries constellation, and they were accepted as members. This hybrid race was accepted as members of their human colonies. So they exist still. It's a little interesting that because of their reptilian hybrid nature, those human reptilian hybrids have a tendency to be comfortable on the drier planets. So in the Alpha Aries system, the hybrid groups live more on a planet that's closer to their sun and drier than the water-based planet where most of the humans live on that star system. And then the last one I want to mention, which I'm going to go into more detail about, is the Pleiades. The Pleiades is quite famous for a couple of reasons. One, it's one of the few constellations or star systems that's mentioned in the Bible. The Pleiades is specifically mentioned in one of the Psalms, that God has created the Pleiades, and can you equal that? Can you create the Pleiades? There's a hymn or a psalm like that. So the Pleiades is a group of, mostly visible are 7 stars. It's one of my favorite. I don't know why I'm attracted to it also, but if you look, it's visible now, not in the evening, but in the later night and early morning hours. You can see the Orion constellation, which I pointed out before. Orion is also something I'm very fond of and feel attached to. So Orion is one of the very visible and easily identifiable constellations, with its 3 stars of its belt, and Orion is pictured as a hunter, and if you see those 3 stars, you follow them upwards or towards the west, you will come to the constellation of Taurus, and Aldebaran is a very bright star, reddish star, and if you continue following that pathway from the 3 stars of the Orion's belt, you come to this. It's sort of faint. I mean, they're fairly it's completely visible, but it's not bright like the brightest stars in the sky. But it's a very beautiful, faint group of especially 7 stars, which are called the 7 sisters. But actually, in that Pleiadian star group, there are thousands. I have written down here, I believe, the number. I'm trying to remember exactly how many, but there are, yes, there are about 200 human star groups. There are, yes, 250,000 stars within the Pleiades, and on them there are about 200 star nations. So the Pleiades has a number of different types of groups, and the human groups of Pleiades have been very active in interacting with our Earth, so I want to talk a little bit more about them. The Pleiadian humans are famous for being scientists and researchers, and they were settled by human beings, again not Earth humans, by humans, from Lyra, which, as I mentioned, Vega was the first Lyra constellation where the human races began. So from there, many millions of years ago, they settled to other places, and only 400,000 years ago, that's a little later in terms of the human colonization of our part of the galaxy, about 400,000 years ago, the humans came to the Pleiades and settled there. And the Pleiadeans, there are two different types of humans in the Pleiades star systems. One of them looks very Caucasian, with blonde hair and blue eyes, Nordic, or Mediterranean. That is what we commonly call Europeans, range from fair-skinned, blonde, blue-eyed persons to Mediterranean types, darker skin with brown eyes and dark brown to black hair. So there's that group of Pleiadians, and then there's another group of Pleiadian humans which looks very much like Asians, East Asians especially, with almond-shaped eyes, and a variation again, just like the Nordic to Mediterranean varieties. They are some very pale-skinned and some quite dark brown. So those two types of humans exist on the Pleiadian system. And a little more description of them. They look very, very much like us. In fact, Pleiadians can and have been visiting Earth and passing as human beings, but they're a little bit different than us. Their eyes are slightly larger. Their ears are slightly lower on the sides of their heads and slightly smaller. They have very delicate hands and feet with long fingers and toes, and they're slightly taller. They average almost 6 feet to about 7 feet. That is about 1.8 to 2.1 meters. So they're a little taller than we are, but they look very, very much like us. And they have a variety of ships, spaceships. Like almost all civilizations, they have two types of ships. Smaller ones, which you might call scout ships, which are the ones that we usually call flying saucers, because they generally are shaped, like a saucer. And then much larger motherships, as they're called. So the Pleiadian saucers, or scout ships, are the most common ones. They're about 35 to 60 feet, or about 10.5 to 12 meters across, quite small. And they also have a larger type of scout ship, which is not shaped like a saucer, flying saucer, but is shaped more like a cigar. And those can be quite big, a quarter of a mile, or about 400 meters across. And in addition to those, the Pleiadians have their famous motherships, which are much larger. They have a cylindrical shaped one, which is about 5 miles long usually. That's about 8 kilometers. And they can house, hundreds of those smaller command ships or scout ships. They can house like 700 of them. And another type of mothership that the Pleiadians have is huge. It's a slightly flattened sphere shape, and it's like a moon size. It's huge. And they use these ships to survey distant solar systems, different distant star systems, and they can have a huge fleet of from a few to many thousands of ships accompanying them. As I said, they're scientists and researchers, so they're very famous for exploring and doing research on other star systems, including, of course, our own. So the Pleiadians, they are, when I say they're scientists, it's not really what we think of as scientists, that is materialistic scientists. They're spiritual scientists. They're very, very interested in spiritual affairs. But they, as opposed to some of the other human groups, I perhaps didn't go into some detail. I did mention one or two of them, but there are some groups I'm just going to review for a second. I mentioned the people from Aries, from Alpha Aries. They are well known to be artists, and they have incredible art forms, like sort of like our dramas or movies. They're expert at creating living art, and it's very incredible how they can communicate ideas through their art. So that's what the people from Alpha Aries are famous for. So the people of the Pleiades, the humans of the Pleiades, also are very artistic and very interested in art, but although they are spiritually oriented and they understand the special capacity of humans to have an emotional nature and to have compassion, which is a very special feature of humans, but they feel that the way to share that knowledge is through science rather than art. Not that art is wrong, of course, but their tendency, their preferred way of communicating the information that they have gained is through scientific discussion, spiritual scientific discussion and transmission of knowledge, rather than through art. And let me just conclude this class. Let me see the time. Yes, our half hour is up, so I will just conclude by talking a little bit about little more I mentioned about the government systems that humans use, and it's usually a clan system where the society is divided into groups of people with different abilities and tendencies, just like scholars of history and scientists, administrators. So there are different groups, and that's the way the society, we would call it maybe the political system, the rulership system, is divided. And the Pleiadians also extended that. The original system that the Lyrians, and then from Lyra I said they went to Andromeda and Sirius, the Andromedans and Sirians, generally that system of, they had 6 clans or 9 clans. The Pleiadians introduced 12 clans. So that enables people with special tendencies or abilities to be trained from childhood in those abilities so that they can be much more accomplished, and they can accomplish much more in their lifetimes. Of course, their lifetimes are much longer generally than ours are too. All right, so I think I will conclude there and look at the questions and comments. We're going to go on and talk about the humans from Sirius, which is the other group like the Pleiadeans, who have had a lot of interaction, and then I'll describe other human groups also. All right, let's look for any. So Muhammad Nazir Nasir has said, election ke hawale mein, I can't actually read it written in the Farsi lipti, kuch kahein. So today is election day in the United States. I'm actually trying to decide whether I should bother voting or not. I've said in the past I'm not going to vote for either Trump or Clinton. Clinton is a very evil woman. She's a warmonger. She's a murderess. She's the lowest quality of human being. I could never vote for her. Trump also is somewhat of a buffoon, and he has positions on a number of topics that I cannot support, like fracking, and he doesn't understand Islam at all. I can say he has a misconception associating Islam with terrorism, and has expressed friendship for India. So anyway, there are a lot of things about Trump that I find unacceptable, so I can't vote for him either. I could have only reason I would vote for him would be to vote against Clinton, and the only reason I would vote for Clinton, which I won't never do, would be to vote against Trump. So I can vote against both of them, but I can't vote for either of them. And I had explained earlier that I was planning to vote for Andy Basiago, who is a very important person because he's one of the first people that had done teleportation as a child, and he had been teleported even to Mars, and he had been teleported to the past and the future. So he's now running, or he was running for President of the United States, but I've recently heard that he may have withdrawn. I may vote for him anyway, just as if I'm going to vote, that's who I would vote for. But maybe I'm not even going to vote. That's another way to protest the system, is to not vote at all. But anyway, I shouldn't talk about those things. I'm trying to talk about our galactic human neighbors. So we have Hadi Rizvi Saheb asking, I guess this is a little more related to our topic today. What do you think about David Icke's book, The World's Biggest Secrets? There are a series of books about outer space visitors written more than about 30 years back in the late 60s by a Swiss writer, Erich von Däniken. Can you talk a little more about that in relation to your topic? Wow, well, this is a big question. I could talk about this for a long, long time. David Icke is quite well known for his idea that the leaders of our world are actually reptilians, shape-shifting reptilians. They've made themselves look like human beings, but actually they are reptilians. That may be true. I really don't know, and I haven't done enough research to confirm whether that's true or not. But that's one of the biggest secrets that he talks about in his books. And certainly they are very evil. The Cabal is associated with reptilians. Whether they are themselves reptilians or they sort of get possessed by reptilians, in either one of those cases, the rulership of our world, the Cabal, who call themselves the Illuminati, very famous, becoming famous now. A few years ago they weren't so well known, but now they're being exposed, that actually they are associated with that group of reptilians for thousands of years that has been trying to control our planet, and we're expecting that within actually their program was by the year 2000 to have captured the entire world in a one world government with a fascist dictatorship which they were controlling. So that plan has failed. So I don't know to what extent David Icke may have talked about that, but he must have referred to the fact that the attempts of the Cabal to create one world government are failing. As for Erich von Däniken, yes, he wrote a number of books. In fact, he was one of the first ones who introduced me and many other people to the idea of ancient astronauts or chariots of the gods. That is, he talked about how what were called chariots of the gods in the various teachings and myths of different religious systems, that they were actually extraterrestrial visitors. So that basic premise, I think, is quite correct. That in various holy books, like in the Bible, for example, in the book of Ezekiel, there's a description of wheels within wheels, and there's a description of flying chariots, fiery chariots. So it does appear to me that these are descriptions of extraterrestrial craft which had been seen by Earth beings, and they wrote these descriptions. So let me just go on. Imtisal Kadir Sahib has written, "Hi Alan, could you shed a little bit of light over differences of these extraterrestrial humans and humans on Earth? What made them scientifically more advanced than Earthlings? What do they eat? And how are the conditions over their planet which favor their survival?" Thanks. The main reason why they're more advanced than us is because their civilization is older and more progressed, therefore, than ours. They've been around for much longer. So just like I've talked about the Ra, to some extent, I spoke the last couple of weeks about Ra, who is a social memory complex originating from Venus, the planet of Venus, in our solar system. So they are far more advanced than we are, simply because their evolution began much earlier than ours. The planet Venus began its first density existence before ours, second density existence before ours, third density, So now they have progressed to sixth density, and they've actually left their planet. So they are very, very advanced beings. Similarly, throughout our part of the galaxy, there are many other human groups who, third, fourth density groups, now we're mostly talking about at least fourth density because they're traveling to other star systems. So they are older civilizations than ours. That's why they're more advanced in terms of technology, at least. Scientifically, as you say, they're more advanced than us. So what do they eat? They eat food like we do. They also have replicators. These are machines that can produce food, so they don't have to grow the food. Somehow I would rather have food that's grown rather than food that's produced by a machine, but they do have that ability also. And the conditions over their planet, well, there are many, many different planets that have many different conditions, but the basic type of planet there where the humans moved to, because their original planet was a watery planet with oceans and continents like ours, so they prefer water planets. So most of the planets where the human species were settled, where they colonized, were like their original planet, the third planet around the star Vega, and the stars in the Pleiades, where they settled, the stars in the Andromeda constellation, where they settled, the star Sirius system, where they settled. These are all watery planets mostly. So they're similar to us. So the conditions there are similar to our. In fact, that's, I suppose, why they came here too. So let's just see any other. Joanna Sahiba, Clinton belongs to the reptilian. I feel that they belong to that cabal mindset. Yes, her mentality is clearly a very war-mongering. She was very active in the, for example, the so-called NATO efforts in Libya. It was just a totally illegal overthrow of a legitimate ruler of Libya. Gaddafi was a pretty good man compared to most of the politicians in the world. So she is like that. She is a warmongering person and is related to the reptilians, definitely. She may or may not be a reptilian herself, I don't know, as David Icke has said, about the British royalty, for example. But definitely her tendencies are very reptilian, very self-centered, very evil, very sinful, we would say. Yes, she definitely has that cabal mindset. Okay, let me just check the time again. It is almost 7:15, so I think I will end now. But I will just give a little introduction to what we're going to be moving into. We'll maybe talk a little more about the Pleiadeans, but then we'll talk about the Sirians. Sirius is a very nearby star and a very bright star. And well, actually, it's not one star, it's 3 or 4 stars at least. And the Sirians are famous for having come to the African continent many thousands of years ago and contacted the people there, and there are still records of those early visits. Those were not human forms from Sirius, but amphibious forms. So we're going to talk especially about the human-like beings from Sirius, who are very spiritually oriented and highly advanced in terms of the hierarchy of spiritual administrators of our galaxy. So that's what we'll talk about tomorrow. And in the meantime, thank you all very, very much. Please, if you have the chance, you can go on to Sheldon Neidl's website. He does have a substantial amount of wonderful information there. It is, I think, PAO, Planetary Activation Organization, is the name of his organization. But if you just do a search for Sheldon Neidl, SHELDANNIDLE, you can find his website, and he gives a brief introduction to a number of different species in our galactic neighborhood, non-human as well as human species. So you can read that as a little bit of background too. That's available right on his website. And if you want to get many details, he's written a whole book about 20-some different species that are members of the Galactic Federation in our neighborhood, our galactic neighborhood. So you can do that in the meantime, and I'll see you tomorrow, inshallah, the same time, 7:30 p.m. now in Pakistan, still 6:30 a.m. in California, and we will continue this discussion about the different species of intelligent life that have been encountered by Earth humans and who are a wide variety of different creatures. Thank you very, very much. Allah Hafiz.